So, what follows is the real true story of your mental slavery. Unlike other previous descriptions that have claimed to shed light on the story of something's enslavement, this story aims to actually tell the truth of the matter, which starts by understanding that our apparent ostensible existence is not so much a physical medium as we have long been told to believe, but rather of a purely mental agency. A truth that has been buried and kept top secret for a very long time. Awareness is the absolute truth. This is the undeniable, irrefutable, fundamental default axiom of existence. It cannot be falsified, and yet, nevertheless, not only meets the burden of proof, but is in fact that which gives the very context to a burden of proof. This knowledge, which ultimately became a contemporary secret, was at one time more widely understood by a few of the ancient civilizations. But eventually this wisdom fell into the shadows of ignorance, due to, at first, attachments to abstractions concerning the imagined existence of divine supernatural entities, or other such similar superstitions. And then later, after the hubris and lust for power that are inevitable with the apparent endorsement of a supreme being had set in, to the heavy laden of attachments to the mundane indulgences and sensory pleasures. This is the road of excess, which, while true, can sometimes lead to a palace of wisdom, can also lead, in different circumstances, to a palace of ignorance. These are the sweet fruits of delusion, born from unmitigated theocracy, monarchy, war, and conquest. Hence the mind fell and lowered itself all the way down to the level of the mundane. This is where science, aka knowledge built on the face value of sensory perceptions, took its course. Hence materialism, hence the conception of a reality existing independent of awareness, took root. Once the cloud of ignorance progressed this far, clarity became diluted, and lucidity was eventually lost, as the emerging hedonistic tendencies eventually came to dominate the focus of human consciousness. Before long, existence became totally solidified into an objectification. Once this was established, the prison was complete. And now, to sustain the delusion, only needed to be continually reinforced. A delusion to which the formula is simple: to institute a false description of reality that finds comfort and normalcy in assigning power and responsibility to factors imagined to be external of awareness, by any means necessary, whether it be by way of oppression, deprivation, fear, pain, or suffering, or whatever else is required, matters not. What matters is to systematically break down the will of the consciousness and thus weaken the mind, leaving one as a helpless object of dependency, totally disconnected from the truth of awareness, to the point where one no longer even believes there is any such thing as a will, and foolishly dismisses awareness as a derivative of some greater extrinsic source. Now, to this point, whether this attribution is to theology or science doesn't really matter, as the end result of what it achieves remains the same. And so, this description of reality continued to develop over the passing years until it finally resulted in complete crystallization in our modern times, culminating into ideologies such as objectivism, which represents the full realization of this deception in Western philosophy, wherein one is now deliberately conditioned to believe reality is independent of the mind, instilled at birth by default. And so it remains until this very day, and may continue to remain until such a time that one can figure out how to break free from this imposed conditioning. For so long as you remain convinced that you are some type of limited physical creature that is devoid of free will and is bound to the laws of some type of limiting physical parameters, you will remain fully in the bondage of mental slavery. And what to do if one decides that they want to free themselves from these binds? A good question. Where to start? Okay, well, one thing that you're gonna need to eventually come to grapple with is this deeply ingrained proclivity within you to always fall under the spell of sensory illusion, in one form or another, which thereby assigns power and responsibility to the aspects of sensory illusion in one way or another, hence constraining freedom. Mastering this proclivity is, in a nutshell, the basic process entailed in breaking the externalization conditioning, the culmination of sustained effort in allowing the recognition of awareness as the fundamental reality to blossom. This process represents more of a reordering of an improper configuration of the attention, rather than as any struggle of an ego character against some malevolent villain. The mental reordering is the actual process. The fight against the villain is just the allegorical projection of the reordering, which we'll delve into deeper in a moment. But it's important to keep the truth of this distinction in mind. Otherwise, the technique can quickly turn into yet another externalization. The illusion isn't an enemy, despite all the deception, violence, and suffering it may seem to foster. Illusion is simply an aspect of mental phenomena, plain and simple. It's there for you to utilize. It's even there for you to command. But it will never relent to those who continue to allow it to hold power. So this is an exercise that should be used for training the mind, and not something to be taken personally. This is, after all, the natural effect that illusions of sensory perceptions have on consciousness. They are enticing and mesmerizing, mainly due to an undisciplined focus and an attention that becomes too easily ensnared by distractions. So don't get angry or impatient with illusion, as it's just doing its job and is ultimately indifferent to you one way or another, due to it being empty, unsubstantial mental phenomena. Getting disturbed about it is akin to getting angry at a mirage because you thought it was an oasis of water, or holding a personal grudge against a holographic image that you find offensive. The problem here is that your attention is transfixed on illusion. If you are dismayed at this setup, then what are you waiting for? Why are you lying down on the ground, awaiting rescue? You can fool yourself into ignorance, but don't be so foolish as to believe delusion will provide a savior to carry you out of ignorance. You will not break the externalization conditioning by waiting on illusion to do the work, nor by going to battle against the appearances of illusion, as both of these approaches are still indicative of a disconnect from the truth. It's not so much that you need to master illusion before the illusion masters you, but that you need to take command of your focus and direct your attention with patience and discipline, irrespective of the movements of illusion. Understanding this, it becomes clear that instead of wasting time getting triggered and upset at something having pushed your buttons, one should be concentrating on stalking the habits of the inner design, thereby enabling the discovery and removal of any and all such buttons. Don't spend so much energy on having emotions about the traps, but instead spend the energy in learning how to identify, resist, and dismantle the traps. For illusion will always be there, always ready to offer up the most up-to-date, tailor-made bait, tempting desire, seeking to lure, lull, or pacify the consciousness into acquiescence through its various tactics of clever deception. The fact that you are in a submissive position relative to mental phenomena is the result of delusion to illusion, which is just another way of saying that the mind has been conditioned to find it normal to submit to imaginary appearances. Indeed, because they're real. And understand you will find next to no reinforcement of the contrary otherwise, as everyone else around you is also conditioned likewise. Hence, uncovering the truth will depend wholly on taking responsibility and exercising inner reliance, and coming to recognize that reality is of a mental facility, so to speak. That's right. Existence is primarily a mental state, as it is experienced in a mental context. So reality is fundamentally mental first, before it then goes on to later be described in abstractions by externalists as a construct that exists independently of your mind. As long as they can obtain your obedience to a mind-independent reality, you will be in mental slavery. Do you understand that? As long as they can obtain your obedience to a mind-independent reality, you consent to being a slave, whether consciously or unconsciously. If there was ever something out there that could be described as an agenda, this is it. And those that propagate and impose this conditioning willfully represent the true face of the modern sophist. For the sophist, which basically means a philosophical con man, having this conditioning serving as a default constitutes the very basis of the artful deception. Not to mention that humans loathe to take on responsibility for life. Better to leave that in the hands of God or the universe. Better to chalk that off to determinism. anything but to take responsibility. But we are powerless, Sage, and our thoughts don't have the ability to defy the laws of physics. So how can we be responsible? Yes, of course. Responsibility is elsewhere, and hence so is power. This is exactly the desired configuration of the externalists. It's what allows illusion to continually dominate you, because you have unknowingly agreed to conform to a set of rules without the purview of proper prior contemplation. If you can maintain clarity on this issue, then there will never again be any such thing as confusion over a false guide or false teaching. As a rule of thumb, when trying to determine the true alignment of any potential guide or teaching, you need only note where it asks you to assign power. And this is something that you will begin to notice quite glaringly once you understand where the truth is. These sophists are going to try to continually direct your attention to outside aspects and implore you to assign power there. The specific doesn't matter. And as alluded to earlier, whether it be to a god, a leader, a government, an ideology, or to scientific notions of chemicals, elements, biology, forces, or materials, doesn't matter. As long as you are attributing the source of reality to something beyond awareness, the inculcation is complete. They want you to struggle with choosing between different items, and they don't care which one you select, because they have no true loyalty to any of them. So long as you are choosing between falsehoods, what you choose is inconsequential. This is the fabric of the externalization conditioning, of which is the real true story of your mental slavery.